The rain fell over Seoul in thick grey sheets, a perfect mirror for the misery churning in Yihua's soul. He stood by the penthouse window of his Gangnam tower, a glass of expensive whiskey warming in his hand, untouched for the last hour. The city lights shimmered beneath him, a world he commanded with a flick of his wrist, yet he felt utterly powerless. His mind wasn't on the next shipment or the rival gang encroaching on his territory. It was on her, Sora, the wife he had discarded, the woman whose name he had never bothered to learn properly until it was too late. 3 years since he had woken up with a hangover that felt like death and an emptiness in his arms that felt even worse. He remembered that morning with the crystalline clarity of a nightmare, the sunlight streaming through the curtains he'd never bothered to notice before, the indentation on the pillow beside him, still warm, the scent of her, jasmine and something uniquely her, lingering on the sheets. And then the slow, horrifying realization of what he had done the night before, followed by the crushing weight of what he had said. Yuna. He had called her Yuna. He had stumbled out of bed, his head pounding, his mouth dry, calling her name. Sora, Sora. He'd checked the bathroom, the closet, the living room, the kitchen. Nothing. Her side of the closet was still full, he'd noted with desperate relief. She wouldn't leave her clothes. She'd come back. She had to come back. She didn't. By noon, he'd realized her jewelry was gone, the few sentimental items from her mother. By evening, he understood that Sora, the quiet girl who asked for nothing, had taken only what mattered and vanished like smoke. He'd torn apart Seoul looking for her. He'd used every resource of the Beak clan, every informant, every dirty cop on his payroll. Nothing. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. Her father, Quaim, had refused to take his calls for weeks. When he finally did, the big Ghanaian's voice had been cold as Arctic ice. She called me that morning, Yihua, crying, broken. Do you know what she told me? She said she finally understood. She said she'd spent a year hoping you'd see her, really see her, and instead you proved that even in your most vulnerable moment she was just a stand-in for someone else. I told her to come home. She said she couldn't. She said she needed to disappear. And I helped her. Because you ungrateful bastard, didn't deserve to wipe her feet. The line had gone dead. Quaim had erased himself from Yihua's world too, taking his diamond connections with him. The alliance Yihua had married for was gone. The wife he'd never wanted was gone. And the lover he thought he loved had been exposed as a spy for his rival, laughing about the stupid, emotional gangster she'd been playing for months. The wedding had been held in the neutral, opulent office of Elder Park, a man who had overseen such alliances for decades. Yihua, 28 years old and newly ascended to head of the Beak clan after his father's sudden heart attack, stood ramrod straight in his bespoke charcoal suit. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. Across from him stood his bride, Sora, who was 22, fresh out of university, where she'd been studying fashion design. Her father, Quaim Osai, was a Ghanaian immigrant who had built an empire in the illicit diamond trade, moving stones from conflict zones through legitimate channels until they emerged, clean and sparkling, in the showrooms of Geneva and Antwerp. He was a man Yihua needed. The Beak clan's traditional money laundering operations were under federal scrutiny. Quaim's network had offered a lifeline, and the marriage was Quaim's price. Sora had worn a simple white hanbok, the traditional Korean dress looking modern and striking against her dark skin. She looked beautiful, he remembered. Her mother, he knew, had been Korean, a woman who had fallen in love with a Ghanaian businessman and faced her family's disapproval to marry him. Sora had obviously inherited her mother's delicate features, the high cheekbones, the graceful neck, and her father's rich, warm complexion and full, expressive mouth. Her hair was a cascade of dark curls, pulled back with a simple silk ribbon. She looked terrified, but he didn't care. He barely looked at her during the brief ceremony. When Elder Park pronounced them married and suggested a kiss, Yihua gave her a cold, perfunctory peck on the cheek that made her flinch. Quaim's eyes had narrowed, but he'd said nothing. The deal was done. Their wedding night set the pattern for their entire marriage. Yihua retreated to his study with a bottle of whiskey. Sora sat alone in their massive bedroom, still in her hanbok, waiting. Around midnight, she'd come to the study door, knocking softly. Yihua, are you coming to bed? He'd looked at her standing there, so hopeful, so naive, and felt a surge of irrational resentment. I'm working, go to sleep. She'd nodded, hurt flickering across her face before she hid it. Okay, good night. He didn't answer. That memory made him wince even now, all these years later. She'd only been trying. For an entire year she'd tried. He remembered all the dinners she'd cook, beautiful, elaborate Korean meals she'd learned from her mother, alongside spicy Ghanaian stews she'd grown up with. She'd leave them in the dining room with a note. I made too much, thought you might be hungry. He'd eat instant ramen in his study just to avoid sitting with her. He remembered the gifts. For Chuseok, she'd left a beautifully wrapped box outside his door containing a traditional silk tie and a handwritten card. "Thank you for everything. I hope we can be friends." He'd had his assistant return it with a curt note saying he didn't accept gifts from employees. Employees, he called his wife an employee. He remembered the morning he'd woken with a fever of 39 degrees, sweating and delirious. He'd heard a soft knock and then her voice. "Yi-Hua, I heard you moving around. Are you sick?" Before he could answer, she'd pushed the door open, taken one look at him and immediately gone into action. She'd cooled his forehead with damp cloths, made him traditional rice porridge with ginger, left herbal medicine on his nightstand. She'd done all of this silently, efficiently, and then disappeared without asking for thanks. He never said thank you. Sometimes he thought about Yuna. She was a painter, she said. She lived in a small studio in Hongdae. She didn't know who he was, which was refreshing. She talked about art and beauty and the meaning of life, all the things Yi-Hua never got to discuss in his world of violence and money. She listened to him complain about his arranged marriage, about the cold girl he was stuck with, about the pressure of running the clan. "That sounds awful," she'd said, touching his hand. "To be trapped like that, you deserve someone who actually sees you." He was hooked. Their affair lasted 9 months. Yuna was everything he believed Sora wasn't: passionate, demanding, exciting. She made him feel alive. She made him forget for a few hours at a time that he was a monster wearing a tailored suit. He'd been so blind. The night it all fell apart, he'd shown up at her studio with champagne, ready to tell her he was leaving Sora, damn the consequences. He'd pushed open the door to find her tangled in bed with Park Jin-soo, his biggest rival. They were both laughing. "And he actually believes I'm in love with him," Yuna was saying, gasping between giggles. "The stupid bastard. He talks about his Ice Queen wife like she's the problem, and he has no idea I'm feeding everything to you." Jin-soo had laughed, stroking her hair. "Best investment I ever made, baby. When I take over the Beak clan, you'll have whatever you want." Yi-Hua had stood in the doorway, the champagne bottle slipping from his fingers and shattering on the floor. They'd both turned, startled. Yuna's face had flickered through shock, fear, and then settled on cold amusement. "Well," she'd said, not even bothering to cover herself, "look who finally decided to show up without an invitation." He'd left without a word. What was there to say? He'd gone to a bar after that, then another, then a third. He'd drunk so much soju he'd lost count, the taste of it burning away the humiliation, the rage, the crushing weight of his own stupidity. Somewhere around midnight, he'd stumbled out of the last bar and his driver, used to his moods, had taken him home without a word. Home to the penthouse, to his wife. The apartment was dark except for a single light in the hallway. Yi-Hua fumbled with the door, eventually getting it open, and staggered inside. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't be alone. The image of Yuna's mocking face kept swimming before his eyes. And he needed. He found himself outside Sora's door. Light glowed from underneath. She was awake. Of course she was awake. She was always there, wasn't she? Always present, always waiting, always hopping. And he'd ignored her, for a liar, for a woman who'd been laughing at him. He pushed the door open. Sora sat up in bed, a book in her lap, her dark curls tumbled around her shoulders. She wore a simple cotton nightgown, and without makeup she looked younger, softer. Her eyes widened when she saw him, his disheveled state, his red-rimmed eyes, the reek of soju clinging to him. "Yi-Hua," she set the book aside, concern flooding her features. "What happened? Are you okay?" He didn't answer, he just stared at her. She was real, solid, kind. She wasn't a lie, she'd never been a lie. She'd only ever been exactly what she appeared to be, a good person stuck in a bad situation, trying to make the best of it. And he'd punished her for it. He crossed the room in 3 unsteady strides. He saw her eyes flicker with something, fear, anticipation, and then he was sitting on the edge of her bed, reaching out to touch her face. Her skin was warm, soft. She inhaled sharply but didn't pull away. "Yi-Hua, what are you doing?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He didn't know anything anymore. He only knew that she was here, and she was warm, and for the first time all night the pain in his chest eased slightly. He leaned in and kissed her. For a frozen moment she was rigid with shock. Then, with a sound that was half sob, half sigh, she melted into him. Her arms came up around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. She kissed him back with a desperate intensity that surprised him, that ignited something he'd never felt before. This wasn't Yuna's practiced passion. This was real. This was a woman who had been starved for affection for a year, finally receiving it. The night that followed was unlike anything Yi-Hua had ever experienced. It wasn't just sex. It was connection. It was two lonely people finding each other in the dark. Sora was shy at first, then gradually more confident, meeting him move for move, her body speaking a language he'd never bothered to learn. When it was over, they lay tangled together, sweaty and breathless, and Yihua felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin, breathing in the scent of her hair. Jasmine and something else, something that was just her. He was so tired, so drunk, so emotionally drained. He felt her relax against him, her hand splayed over his heart, and in the warm, hazy aftermath, he murmured the only name his broken brain could connect to the feeling of comfort. Yuna. He felt her go rigid, every muscle in her body tensed, but he was already spiraling into unconsciousness, too far gone to understand what he'd done. His last thought before sleep claimed him was that he felt safe. He felt whole. Morning came with brutal clarity. Yihua woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and an arm draped over an empty space. He blinked, disoriented, and then the memories of the night before crashed over him. The bar, Yuna's betrayal, coming home, Sora, oh God, Sora. He sat up, his head pounding. Sora. Silence. He stumbled out of bed, still naked, and searched the room. Her clothes were gone. Her jewelry box was open and empty. He ran to the closet, her side was bare. He ran through the apartment, calling her name, but he already knew. He already knew what he'd done. The name, he'd called her Yuna. Even in his moment of vulnerability, even when she'd given him everything, he'd called her by another woman's name. He sank to the floor in the living room, his head in his hands, and for the first time since he was 10 years old, Yihua Beak cried. The memory still had the power to make his chest ache. 3 years, and he could still feel the exact texture of that morning, the terror, the shame, the dawning realization that he'd lost something irreplaceable. He'd searched, but Sora had vanished completely. Her father had helped her disappear, and Kwame Osai's network was as good as Yihua's, maybe better. There was no trace, no bank activity, no phone calls, no sightings. It was as if she'd never existed. He'd thrown himself into work after that, running the clan with a cold efficiency that made his enemies nervous and his allies uneasy. He'd expanded his territory, crushed his rivals, including Jinsu, whose body was never found, and built the Beak clan into something his father would have been proud of. But none of it mattered. None of it filled the empty space where Sora should have been. He'd stopped looking after the first year. What was the point? She clearly didn't want to be found, she clearly wanted nothing to do with him, and who could blame her? But he'd never stopped thinking about her, never stopped wondering where she was, if she was okay, if she'd found someone who deserved her. The thought of her with another man was like a knife in his gut, but he had no right to feel that way. He'd lost any right to her the moment he'd whispered that name. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his reverie. He glanced at the screen. Doyan, his head of security. Yes. Boss, I've got something. Doyan's voice was tense with excitement. That tailor you asked us to look for, the one whose style matched the sketches you gave us. We found her. Small shop in Itaewon. Name on the lease is Sora Osai. Yihua's heart stopped, then started again, hammering against his ribs. You're sure? Positive. We've had someone watching the shop for 3 days to confirm. Boss, there's more. Yihua's hand tightened on the phone. What? There's a child, a little girl. She calls the woman Oma. Boss, she's about 2 years old, maybe a little older. The phone slipped from Yihua's fingers, clattering to the floor. He stared at it, unseeing, his mind reeling. A child, 2 years old. The timing was exactly right. He had a daughter. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The rain washed away to leave Seoul gleaming under pale winter sun. Yihua stood across the street from a small shop in Itaewon, his heart pounding so hard he was sure passers-by could hear it. The shop was modest, a simple wooden sign reading Sora's Stitch, in both Korean and English, a large window displaying beautifully tailored garments, a mix of traditional Korean designs and modern West African prints. Through that window he could see her. Sora was bent over a sewing machine, her dark curls pulled back in a messy bun, a measuring tape draped around her neck. She was thinner than he remembered, and there were shadows under her eyes, but she was still beautiful. More beautiful somehow. There was a strength in her posture now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She moved with the ease of someone who had built something of her own. And then he saw the child. She appeared suddenly, running into the frame of the window with the unsteady gait of a toddler. She was small and beautiful, her skin a warm bronze, her hair a mass of dark curls. She tugged at Sora's skirt, babbling something, and Sora laughed, a real laugh, bright and warm, scooping the child up and kissing her cheek. The girl turned, and Yihua's breath caught in his throat. It was like looking at a ghost. His mother's face perfectly replicated in miniature, the same heart-shaped face, the same large, expressive eyes, the same precise bow of the mouth. He'd seen that face in photographs all his life, and now here it was, animated and alive, staring out at the street with curious innocence. She was his, there was no doubt. She was absolutely, unquestionably his. He crossed the street without conscious thought, his feet carrying him forward while his mind raced. The little bell above the door chimed as he pushed it open. Sora looked up, a professional smile on her lips, and then the smile died. Her face went pale, then flushed with colour, then pale again. She clutched the child tighter to her chest, one hand cradling the back of the little girl's head. "No," she whispered. "No, not you, not here." Yihua stood frozen just inside the door, his eyes moving from her face to the child's and back again. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He could only stand there, drinking in the sight of them, his wife and his daughter, the family he'd thrown away. "Sora," his voice came out rough, cracked. "I've been looking for you for 3 years. Then you wasted your time." Her voice was hard, nothing like the soft, tentative tone he remembered. "I don't want to be found, not by you." The little girl, sensing her mother's tension, squirmed and looked at Yihua with curious eyes. She studied him for a long moment, then pointed a chubby finger. "Saja," she announced confidently. The word hit Yihua like a physical blow. Lion, the symbol of his clan. The child had never seen him before, never known him, and yet she looked at him and saw a lion. Sora's eyes widened. "Haryun, no." "Haryun," Yihua repeated. The name meant grace, a gift from God. "Her name is Haryun." Sora's jaw tightened. "You don't get to ask about her name, you don't get to ask about anything, you need to leave, now." "I'm not leaving." Yihua took a step forward, then stopped when Sora flinched back. "I'm not here to hurt you, I'm not here to take her, Sora, I just found out I have a daughter. Please, let me explain, let me try." "There's nothing to explain." Sora's voice shook, but her eyes blazed with fury. "I know exactly what happened that night, Yihua. I was there. I gave you everything I had, and you called me by her name. You used my body and my heart, and then you shattered both in the same breath. I will not let you do the same to her." The words were like knives, each one finding its mark. Yihua felt them hit, felt the truth of them, and for a moment he couldn't breathe, but he didn't look away. He didn't retreat. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right, I did all of that. I was cruel and blind and stupid, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to even look at you. But Sora, she's my daughter. I didn't know she existed until yesterday, but now that I do, I can't just walk away. I can't." Haryun, oblivious to the tension, had grown bored with the conversation and was now tugging at her mother's collar, babbling about something that looked interesting outside. Sora shifted her weight, torn between her protective instincts and something else flickering in her eyes when she looked at him. "How did you find me?" she asked finally. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm here. Sora, please, let me be part of her life. I'll do whatever you ask. I'll follow whatever rules you set. I can't lose her before I've even had a chance to know her." A long, painful silence stretched between them. Sora stared at him, searching his face for something, sincerity, deception, she didn't know. Finally, she let out a long breath. "Sundays," she said. "You can come on Sundays, 2 hours in the park across the street. You can watch her play, that's all." Yihua felt a rush of relief so intense his knees nearly buckled. Thank you, Sora." "Don't thank me." Her voice was cold again. "This isn't for you, it's for her. Every child deserves to know their father, even if their father is." She stopped, shook her head. "Just go, I'll text you the time. And Yihua," she met his eyes and there was steel in hers. If you hurt her, if you hurt either of us again, I won't run this time, I'll destroy you. I have friends now, powerful friends, don't test me." He believed her. Looking at her now, seeing the fierce protectiveness in every line of her body, he believed her completely. This was not the quiet girl who'd left him porridge outside his door. This was a woman forged in fire, and she would burn him to ash if he gave her reason. "I understand," he said. "I won't test you." He looked at Haryun one more time, at his mother's eyes in his daughter's face, and then he turned and left. The first Sunday was awkward beyond belief. Yihua arrived at the park early, wearing clothes he'd bought specifically for the occasion, casual jeans and a sweater, nothing that screamed Mafia Boss. He carried a small stuffed lion he'd purchased at a children's store, feeling ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. Sora arrived exactly on time, pushing Haryun in a stroller. She looked beautiful in a simple dress and cardigan, her curls loose around her shoulders. She also looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "He's here," she said to Haryun, pointing at Yihua. "Remember Appa? We talked about Appa." Ha-yoon stared at him with the intense scrutiny of a toddler assessing a potential threat. Then her gaze dropped to the stuffed lion in his hands, and her face lit up. "Saja," she shrieked, struggling against the stroller straps. Yi-hua knelt down, holding out the toy. "For you," he said. "His name is Leo." Ha-yoon grabbed the lion, hugged it fiercely, and then looked at Yi-hua with an expression of pure delight. "Appa," she announced, as if she'd just figured out a complex puzzle. "Appa Saja." Sora's expression flickered, surprise, pain, something softer before she masked it. "She's very verbal for her age," she said, as if reporting clinical data. "She speaks in Korean and English, mostly Korean. She loves animals. She's terrified of loud noises." Yi-hua absorbed the information greedily, filing it away like precious jewels. "She's perfect," he said, and meant it. The 2 hours passed in a blur of chasing Ha-yoon around the playground, pushing her on the swings and catching her at the bottom of the slide. Yi-hua discovered that being a father was terrifying. Every stumble made his heart stop. Every near miss sent adrenaline surging through his veins. But it was also the most amazing thing he'd ever experienced. Ha-yoon laughed easily, trusted completely, and looked at him like he was the most interesting person in the world. When Sora finally said it was time to go, Yi-hua felt something he hadn't felt in years: genuine disappointment. "Same time next week?" he asked, trying to keep the hope out of his voice. Sora studied him for a long moment. "Maybe," she said, "we'll see." But she was back the next Sunday, and the next, and the next. The weeks turned into months. Sunday became sacred. Yi-hua's one day of the week when he wasn't the head of the Beak clan, wasn't a monster in a suit, wasn't the man who destroyed his marriage. He was just Appa, the man who pushed swings and caught Ha-yoon at the bottom of slides and brought the best snacks. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sora began to thaw. It started with small things. She'd bring coffee for both of them, handing him a cup without comment. She'd sit on the bench instead of standing apart, watching him with Ha-yoon. She'd occasionally offer a piece of information: Ha-yoon's favorite food, her current obsession with butterflies, the way she sang in her sleep. Yi-hua treasured each tidbit like gold. One Sunday it rained. Yi-hua showed up anyway, umbrella in hand, and found Sora and Ha-yoon huddled under the park's small shelter. Ha-yoon was bored and cranky, and Sora looked exhausted. "We can't play in this," Sora said, stating the obvious. "I know a place," Yi-hua said. "Indoor playground, warm, dry, I'll drive." Sora hesitated, and for a moment he thought she'd refuse. Then Ha-yoon tugged at her hand, whining, "Oma, play, play." "Fine," Sora said, "but you're buying lunch." It was the first time they'd spent time together outside the park. The indoor playground was chaotic and loud, full of shrieking children and harried parents. Ha-yoon loved every second of it. Yi-hua chased her through tunnels and slides while Sora watched from a bench, and when they finally stopped for lunch, Ha-yoon fell asleep in her pizza, exhausted and happy. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, watching their daughter sleep. Then Sora spoke. "She asks about you, during the week. She asks when Appa is coming." Yi-hua's heart clenched. "What do you tell her?" "I tell her Sundays, I tell her Appa loves her." Sora's voice was soft, thoughtful. "I wasn't going to. At first I was going to keep you at a distance, just Sundays, just the park, but she loves you, Yi-hua. She lights up when she sees you, and I can't take that away from her." "You could," Yi-hua said quietly. "You have every right, I gave you every reason." Sora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, less guarded, more vulnerable. "Do you remember the porridge?" Yi-hua blinked. "What?" "The morning you were sick, I made you porridge, left it outside your door." She wasn't looking at him, her eyes fixed on Ha-yoon's sleeping face. "I'd never taken care of anyone like that before. My mother died when I was young, and my father, he loved me but he wasn't tender. He didn't know how. I wanted to be tender with you. I wanted to show you that I could be the person you needed." Yi-hua felt the words like blows. "Sora." "Let me finish." She held up a hand. "I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because I need you to understand. I loved you, Yi-hua, from the beginning. I know you didn't want this marriage, but I did. I wanted you. I wanted to build something with you. And every time you pushed me away, it hurt. Every time you ignored me, it hurt. But I kept hopping. I kept thinking maybe tomorrow he'll see me. Maybe tomorrow he'll realize I'm here." Her voice cracked slightly. "That night, when you came to my room, I thought my prayers had been answered. I thought you'd finally seen me. And then you held me and I felt safe for the first time in a year, and you called me her name." She finally looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? To be so completely invisible that even in your most vulnerable moment, I was just a stand-in for someone else." Yi-hua couldn't speak. There was a fist around his heart, squeezing tight. I ran because I couldn't bear to see your face when you woke up, she continued. I couldn't bear to watch you realize what you'd done and see the disgust in your eyes when you looked at me, so I left before you could reject me again. Sora, his voice was barely a whisper. I would never have been disgusted. I was disgusted with myself. When I woke up and you were gone, I knew exactly what I'd done. I remembered saying her name. I remembered everything. And I hated myself more than I've ever hated anyone. He reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He took her hand and she let him. That night, he said, was the most real thing I'd ever experienced. You were real, you were warm, you were everything she pretended to be. And when I held you, I felt peace for the first time in years. The name, God, Sora, the name was habit, it was a reflex. My drunk, broken brain attached the wrong word to the right feeling. But it was you, it was always you, I was just too stupid to know it. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I've spent 3 years regretting every moment I wasted, Yihua continued. Every dinner I didn't share with you, every gift I returned, every cold look. I've spent 3 years wishing I could go back and shake myself, scream at myself to open my eyes and see what was right in front of me. He squeezed her hand. I can't go back, but I can go forward if you'll let me, if you'll give me a chance to prove that I'm not that man anymore, that I see you now, Sora. I see you clearly, and I love you. I think I've always loved you. I was just too afraid to admit it. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant shrieks of playing children and the soft breathing of their sleeping daughter. Sora looked at their joined hands, then at his face, then back at their hands. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared of being hurt again. I know, he lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips. I'm scared too, scared of failing you again, scared of not being enough, but I'm more scared of losing you, of losing both of you. Sora, please, give me a chance, give us a chance. She was quiet for a long time, then slowly she nodded. Okay, she whispered, okay. After that, everything changed. Sunday expanded to include lunch, then dinner. Yihua started coming by the shop during the week, bringing lunch for Sora and playing with Haryun in the back room while she worked. He learned to thread her sewing machines, to sort fabrics, to entertain a toddler while simultaneously running one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Seoul. Sora started leaving things for him at the shop, a book she thought he'd like, a scarf she'd made, snacks he'd mentioned enjoying. Small things but meaningful. Each one was a tiny bridge between them, spanning the chasm of 3 lost years. One evening, Haryun was asleep in the back room, and Yihua and Sora sat in the front of the shop, drinking tea and watching the streetlights come on. It had become a ritual, these quiet evenings after Haryun's bedtime, when they could talk without interruption. I've been thinking, Sora said, about what you said about being afraid. Yihua looked at her, waiting. I'm not as afraid anymore, she continued. When I watch you with Haryun, when I see the way you look at her, the way you look at me, I don't see the man who hurt me, I see someone else, someone I could love. Could, Yihua's heart hammered. Sora smiled, a real smile, warm and open. Someone I do love. I never stopped, Yihua, I tried. God, I tried, but I never stopped. He reached for her and she came willingly, settling into his arms like she'd always belonged there. They sat like that for a long time, watching the night descend over Itaewon, holding each other and the fragile, precious thing they were building. I want to come home, Yihua whispered into her hair. Not to the penthouse, to you, to Haryun. I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to be there for her first day of school, her first crush, her first heartbreak. I want to grow old with you, Sora. I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the year I wasted. Sora pulled back slightly, looking up at him. What about the clan? I'll manage it. I've been managing it from here for months. The penthouse is already on the market. He smiled wryly. I've been preparing just in case. She laughed, a sound that made his heart soar. You were that confident. I was that hopeful. He cupped her face in his hands, gentle as if she were made of glass. Sora, I know I don't deserve you. I know I broke your heart in ways that can never fully heal, but I'm asking anyway. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. Let me be the man you always deserved. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Yihua. He kissed her then, softly, tenderly, with all the love he'd been holding back for 3 years. It was nothing like their first kiss, that desperate, drunken collision. It was everything that kiss should have been. It was a promise. The move happened quickly after that. Yihua sold the penthouse and bought a spacious house in a quiet neighborhood, not too far from Itaewon, but far enough from the chaos of Gangnam. It had a garden for Haryun, a studio for Sora, and a room that would become the nursery for the child they were already starting to hope for. Ha-yoon adapted to the new house with the ease of a toddler, claiming the garden as her kingdom and the living room as her playground. She didn't understand why Appa was suddenly there every morning, but she wasn't complaining. More Appa meant more play, more stories, more piggyback rides. The first night in the new house, after Ha-yoon was asleep, Yi-hwa and Sora stood in their bedroom together, looking out at the garden bathed in moonlight. "Are you happy?" Yi-hwa asked, his arm around her shoulders. Sora leaned into him, her head against his chest. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Terrified that something will go wrong, that you'll change, that I'll wake up and this will all have been a dream." He turned her to face him, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "It's not a dream, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to change except to get better. Every day I'm going to try to be better for you, for Ha-yoon, for us." She searched his face, looking for the lie, the catch, the hidden cruelty. She found none, only sincerity, only love. "I believe you," she said softly. "I don't know how after everything, but I believe you." "That's all I ask." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "That's all I'll ever ask." 3 months later, on a warm spring evening, they stood in the garden watching Ha-yoon chase fireflies. She'd grown so much in the months since Yi-hwa had found them, taller, more articulate, more confident. She still had his mother's face, but there was more of Sora in her, the way she moved, the way she laughed, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. "She's perfect," Yi-hwa said, "not for the first time." "She gets it from me," Sora said, "not for the first time." They both laughed, and Yi-hwa pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him, content. "I was thinking," he murmured in her ear, "about names." "Names." "For the baby." He pressed a hand gently to her still flat stomach, where their second child was just beginning to grow. "If it's a girl, I was thinking, Hana, 1, because she'll be our second, but she'll also be our completion." Sora turned in his arms, surprise on her face. "You've thought about this?" "I've thought about everything." He smiled down at her. "I've thought about our future, about watching our children grow up, about growing old with you, about everything I almost lost and somehow managed to find." Her eyes glistened. "Yi-hwa." "I love you, Sora. I loved you when I was too stupid to know it. I loved you when I was searching for you. I loved you when I found you. And I'll love you until the day I die, and after that too, if there's an after." He kissed her softly. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for Ha-yoon and for this new life and for everything." Sora wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "I love you too," she whispered. "I loved you when I shouldn't have. I loved you when I was running. I loved you when I was hiding. And I'll love you forever, Yi-hwa, forever." Above them, the stars came out one by one. In the garden, Ha-yoon caught a firefly and shrieked with delight. And in each other's arms, 2 people who had lost everything and found each other again stood together, finally home. 5 years later, Ha-yoon, now 7, was practicing her calligraphy at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration as she formed the characters for family. Hana, 4 years old and fearless, was attempting to teach the cat to dance. And in the living room, Sora sat on the couch, nursing the newest addition, a boy this time, born 2 months ago, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's calm demeanor. Yi-hwa stood in the doorway, watching them all, his heart so full it ached. The clan was still there, still running, but differently now. Legitimate businesses had expanded. The violence had been minimized. He'd found a way to be both the man his father raised and the man his family needed. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Sora looked up, catching his eye, and smiled, that smile that still made his heart skip after all these years. "What are you thinking about?" He crossed the room, sitting beside her and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am, how undeserving, how grateful." She leaned into him, the baby nestled between them. "You're not undeserving. You earned this. You earned us." "Maybe," he kissed her temple, "but I'm still grateful every single day." In the kitchen, Ha-yoon finished her calligraphy and held it up. "Appa, Oma, look." They looked on the paper in careful, childish strokes. She'd written 4 characters. Ko udi ein ko gado, ein ko satunghe ein, I love our family. Yi-hwa felt tears prick his eyes, something that happened more often now in this house full of love. "It's perfect, Ha-yoon, absolutely perfect." Hana abandoned the cat and came running over, climbing onto Yi-hwa's lap. The baby stirred, and Sora shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back. Ha-yoon brought her calligraphy over, holding it up for everyone to see. And Yi-hwa looked at his family, his wife, his daughters, his son, and thought about the man he'd been. The cold, cruel man who'd married a stranger and resented her for existing. The broken man who'd called her another woman's name and woken up alone. The desperate man who'd searched for 3 years, not knowing what he was searching for until he found it. He thought about the rain that night, and the rain outside the penthouse window, and the rain that had cleared to reveal a new beginning in Itaewon. He thought about a little girl who'd looked at him and seen a lion, and a woman who'd looked at him and seen someone worth forgiving. Saja, he murmured, looking at Hayoon. She grinned, showing the gap where she'd lost her first tooth last week. Appa Saja, she agreed, but soft lion now, not scary lion. Sora laughed and Hana giggled, and the baby made a soft cooing sound. Yihua wrapped his arms around as many of them as he could reach and held on tight. Soft lion, he agreed, just for you, always just for you. Outside, the sun was setting over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Inside, a family sat together, warm and whole, there passed a shadow that had finally been chased away by light. And Yihua Beek, once the most feared man in the Korean underworld, now the luckiest man in any world, closed his eyes and gave thanks for the gift he'd never deserved and would spend the rest of his life cherishing. His sea conch shell, his grace, his home,